defeat. It coated the back of his throat like the gritty dust that filled the air. It echoed in the sudden, almost sickening silence that descended as a command crackled, tinny and final, over the radio scattered across the disaster zone. All units, incident command advises, we are transitioning to recovery operations. Stand down from active search. Recovery, a clinical word for giving up, a bureaucratic term for accepting that the crushing tons of concrete and steel had claimed their final victims. The sigh of hydraulics powering down felt like a collective exhale of lost hope from the dozens of exhausted firefighters, police officers, and volunteers who stood amidst the ruins of the Phoenix Mill. 12 hours. 12 relentless hours they fought the beasts of collapsed brick and tangled metal, pulling the lucky few from the edges, tending the bleeding, straining ears for any sign of life. Now nothing, only the vast, terrible stillness of the wreckage under the bruised twilight sky. Experts, engineers, probability, they all screamed the same grim truth. No one could survive this long, buried that deep. The search was over. But Captain Dan Miller of Engine 17 didn't lower his gaze. He didn't turn away. 58 years old, his face a road map of soot-stained worry lines, he stood rooted, his boots planted firm on the debris-strewn asphalt. His eyes, bloodshot and narrowed against the swirling dust motes dancing in the portable floodlights, remained fixed on the monstrous heart of the collapse. Recovery. The word lodged itself like shrapnel in his chest. Because somewhere, beneath the finality of the command, beneath the crushing weight of evidence, a different signal pulsed. Faint, stubborn, persistent, a rhythm only he seemed attuned to, a whisper of defiance against the overwhelming silence. They could call it recovery. They could pack up the sensitive listening gear and call in the heavy machinery. But Dan Miller knew, with a certainty that defied logic, that defied the exhaustion screaming in every muscle, he knew someone was still alive in that tangled tomb, and the ghost of a past failure whispered a promise he couldn't break again. He wasn't leaving. Dan Miller was forged in fire, shaped by 35 years of answering the bell. He wasn't a man given to hunches based on thin air. His instincts were hard-earned, honed by countless battles against flame, flood, and structural failure. He was a quiet anchor of Station 17, the one the rookies watched with a mixture of awe and slight intimidation. Not because he yelled, but because he saw. He saw the subtle shift in smoke color that signaled imminent flashover, heard the faint groan of a compromised beam others missed, felt the pulse of a building under stress. His hands, callous and steady, moved with practiced economy, whether checking the seals on an Scott air pack or calibrating the pressure on the hydraulic cutters. He demanded perfection not out of pride, but out of a deep, abiding understanding that preparedness was a thin line between life and death, theirs and the people they swore to protect. His pre-shift ritual was always the same. Arrive early, walk the engine, checking compartments, fluid levels, tire pressure. Then the equipment room, laying hands on the tools, ensuring everything was clean, functional, ready. More than once, a rookie had questioned the redundancy. Chief checks this stuff daily, Cap. Dan would just give a quiet nod. He does. And so, do I. Complacency gets people killed, kid. Never trust a machine you haven't checked yourself. Never trust your life to luck when diligence will do. It wasn't just about mechanics. It was a philosophy. Be ready. Be responsible. Own your piece of the puzzle. His locker held few personal items, but one was telling. A slightly dog-eared photo, tucked behind his spare uniform shirt. Engine 17, 15 years ago. Younger faces, broader smiles. Standing beside a much younger Dan was Jimmy Rourke, barely 22, full of fire and promise. Jimmy, who hadn't come home from a Franklin warehouse fire. A fire where Dan had been incident commander. A fire where the search grid had been declared clear. The structure too unstable to risk further interior operations. A fire where Jimmy's body was found days later, in a small void missing the initial sweep, tragically close to an escape route. The official inquiry cleared Dan, citing the extreme conditions, but the weight of that loss never fully lifted. It settled in his gut, a cold reminder of the terrible responsibility, the razor's-edge decisions, the promises you make not just with words, but with actions. It fueled his meticulousness, his quiet intensity, his unwavering commitment to never leave someone behind if there was even a sliver of a chance. Life outside the station was his ballast. His wife, Sarah, a high school history teacher, understood the silences, the sudden departures, the shadow of worry that sometimes lingered in his eyes after a tough shift. Their small home, with its well-tended garden and slightly crooked mailbox Dan kept meaning to fix, was a sanctuary. He called her that morning, the mundane conversation about groceries, and needing to patch a spot on the roof feeling like a lifetime ago. It was this grounding, this connection to ordinary life, to community, to the simple decencies of looking out for your neighbor that formed the bedrock of his character. Duty wasn't just a word on a badge. It was showing up day after day for your family, your crew, your town. It was the quiet strength of the American spirit he saw reflected in Sarah's unwavering support, in the nods exchanged with familiar faces downtown, in the shared understanding of hard work and resilience that defined their community. He knew the Phoenix Mill, not just from faded blueprints studied years ago, but from walking its dusty floors during inspections back when old Henderson still oversaw the textile looms. He remembered the cavernous main floor, the surprisingly sturdy-looking steel beams supporting the upper levels, now a pancake nightmare, and the maze-like basement, a warren of forgotten storage rooms and ancient machinery foundations. He remembered thinking even then how vulnerable the place felt, a patchwork of old bones and newer, sometimes haphazard, modifications for the artists and small businesses that had moved in. That memory, that intimate knowledge of the structure's potential weaknesses and hidden strengths, nagged at him now. The official assessment made sense on paper, but his gut, informed by memory and that faint, persistent rhythm he'd heard, it told a different story, a story not yet finished. The initial alarm tone shattered the morning calm at Station 17 with brutal force. Not a routine call, not a dumpster fire or a medical assist. This was the big one. Multi-station response. Confirmed structural collapse. Possible entrapment. And then the address, Phoenix Mill. A collective intake of breath seemed to suck the air from the apparatus bay. Every firefighter knew the mill's reputation, its age, its sprawling complexity. This was a call they trained for, the one they dreaded. Let's move. Gear up, people, double time. Dan's voice cut through the sudden adrenaline surge, calm but commanding. Years of training took over. Turnout gear donned in seconds, air packs checked, helmet secured. The controlled chaos of preparation. Engine 17 roared to life, its siren adding to the growing symphony of emergency vehicles converging on the scene from across the city and neighboring towns. The familiar rumble beneath his feet felt different today. Heavier, charged with a palpable sense of urgency bordering on dread. Arriving felt like entering a war zone. The scale of the destruction was breathtaking, horrifying. Where a 4-story brick facade had stood just moments before, there was now a mountain of rubble, pulverized brick, twisted steel beams, and shattered glass. A dense cloud of gray-brown dust billowed outwards, choking the air, reducing visibility to near zero in places. The sounds were a cacophony of chaos, the groaning protest of the remaining structures settling under immense stress, the sharp hiss of ruptured pipes, the distant wail of approaching sirens, and piercing through it all, the panicked shouts and, terrifyingly, the weakening cries for help from the periphery. Police struggled to cordon off the area, pushing back shell-shocked bystanders whose faces reflected disbelief and horror. EMTs had established a triage area on a nearby patch of miraculously untouched grass, already tending to a growing number of injured, workers who'd been near exits, people caught by falling debris outside. Fire crews were deploying hose lines, tackling small pockets of fire ignited by severed electrical lines, their movements urgent but careful, constantly scanning the unstable wreckage above. Dan jumped from the engine, his mind already processing, assessing, prioritizing. He grabbed his command vest. Garcia Martinez. Start primary search, grid pattern, east quadrant. What's accessible? Thompson. Ramirez. Water supply. Establish hydrant connection. Watch those exposures. Everybody, heads on a swivel. Secondary collapse is a major threat. He found the initial incident commander, a captain from Station 3. Quickly exchanging information, sharing his knowledge of the mill's layout from past inspections. They needed structure, control, a plan amidst the maelstrom. Search zones were established, listening posts designated, requests made for heavy rescue specialists and K-9 units. The initial reports filtering back were fragmented and bleak. A dozen confirmed missing, potentially many more. The mill housed a mix of tenants, woodworkers in basement workshops, artists in makeshift lofts on the now-collapsed upper floors, small businesses using units for storage. Rumors of squatters in the long-abandoned sections added another layer of uncertainty. Each rescue in those first few hours felt like a desperate victory snatched from the jaws of disaster. They located an elderly security guard trapped in his booth, miraculously shielded by a steel filing cabinet. They freed a young couple who'd been setting up an exhibit, pulled from beneath fallen ductwork, terrified but alive. But the deeper they probed towards the central collapse zone, the denser and more impenetrable the debris became. Voids grew smaller, scarcer. The silence from within grew louder. Dan led his crew into the maw, crawling through claustrophobic gaps between massive concrete slabs, the air thick with the taste of pulverized cement and something else, something metallic, ominous. The groans of the structure were constant, visceral reminders of the danger. They used thermal imagers, hoping for the faint heat signature of a living body, but the sheer mass of cold concrete often masked any readings. They deployed sensitive listening devices, pressing microphones against slabs, straining to hear anything over the background noise of generators and distant digging. They found pockets where someone might have been, a dropped tool, a knocked-over chair, but no response. Hours crawled by under the relentless sun. Hope began to fray around the edges, worn thin by fruitless searching in the sheer, overwhelming scale of the task. The physics were undeniable. The weight, the lack of survivable spaces. Time was running out. Then Dan felt it more than heard it, a vibration through the concrete he was leaning against. He froze, motioning for silence. He pressed his ear directly to the cold, dusty slab. Thump, paw, thump, thump, paw, thump. It was incredibly faint, irregular, almost lost in the low rumble of the wreckage settling. "You hear that?" he asked Thompson, his voice low. Thompson strained, shook his head. Just the building settling, cap, or maybe pipes banging somewhere deep. No, Dan's certainty was absolute. He'd heard settling debris countless times. This was different, weaker than the tapping he'd mentioned later, more like a desperate, muffled pounding from deep within. That's not settling. That's someone. Sector 4, deep inside. He pointed toward a section characterized by huge, overlapping slabs of flooring and collapsed support columns, arguably the most dangerous and inaccessible part of the pile. They moved the listening gear, focusing the sensitive microphones. Nothing but static and ambient noise. The rescue dogs, brought over moments later, whined and paced, clearly agitated by the instability and scent confusion, but couldn't establish a definitive alert at that specific location. The thermal camera, aimed into the dense mass, registered only cold spots. Frustration tightened Dan's jaw. He knew it. That faint, desperate rhythm wasn't imagination. It was the sound of someone fighting to live. But without confirmation, without proof the sophisticated equipment could detect, he couldn't justify diverting the limited heavy rescue resources and specialized teams to this high-risk, low-probability area. He logged a potential signal with Incident Command, but it was filed as unconfirmed anomaly. He locked the location in his mind, the faint vibration echoing his own stubborn pulse. He wouldn't let it go. That sound was a seed of hope planted in the desolate landscape of despair, and he felt an almost primal urge to protect it. The relentless sun finally dipped below the horizon, trading its harsh glare for the cold, artificial illumination of portable light towers that cast long, dancing shadows across the ruins. 18 hours had bled into 20. The frantic energy of the initial response had long since dissipated, replaced by a bone-deep weariness and the grim reality of the situation. The number of rescues had dwindled to 0 hours ago. The accessible voids had been searched and researched. The listening devices remained stubbornly silent. Battalion Chief Harris, his face etched with exhaustion and the heavy burden command, called the team leaders together near the command post. The drizzle that had started an hour earlier was turning into a steady, miserable rain, plastering dust the surfaces, making the treacherous footing even more dangerous. Harris didn't waste words. His voice was low, gravelly with fatigue and regret. Listen up. We've pushed as far as we safely can. K-9 teams have made final sweeps. Acoustic sensors are negative across all sectors. Thermal imaging shows no signs of life in any accessible areas. The structural engineers have assessed the central collapse zone. He paused, letting the weight of the next word sink in. They're calling it untenable. The risk of catastrophic secondary collapse is too high for further manned entry. We've done everything humanly possible within the rescue window. He looked around at the faces staring back at him, faces streaked with grime, etched with fatigue, reflecting the shared understanding of what came next. Effective 2,100 hours. We are officially transitioning from rescue operations to recovery. We'll begin systematic debris removal at first light with heavy equipment. Site security will maintain the perimeter. Our immediate priority now is safety, securing the site, and notifying the families who are waiting. The words hung in the damp air, heavy and final. A collective sigh seemed to ripple through the group, a sound of acceptance, of grief, of utter exhaustion finally winning out. Crews began securing their equipment, their movements slow, heavy-limbed. The rain seemed to intensify, washing away the last vestiges of defiant hope. But Dan stepped forward, pushing against a tide of resignation. Rainwater dripped from his helmet brim, tracing paths through the grime on his face. "Chief," he began, his voice tight, strained. "Request permission to make one more targeted search. Sector 4. The area I flagged earlier. I'm still convinced there's a possibility." Harris held up a hand, his expression sympathetic but firm. "Dan, we've been over this. We triple-checked that sector after your report. Nothing. The sensors are clear. The dogs gave no definitive alert. I know this is hard. Believe me, nobody wants to make this call." He looked pointedly at Dan, "But I can't risk sending anyone back into that specific zone now. It's too unstable." The engineers were unequivocal. "It's a death trap." "Chief, it wasn't just a sound," Dan pressed, the ghost of Jimmy Rourke feeling palpably close, whispering warnings from the past. "It was a rhythm. Faint, yes, but it was there. What if the equipment missed it? What if they're too deep? What if you're chasing something that isn't there, Dan?" Harris countered, his tone softening slightly, but the decision unwavering. "You're exhausted. We all are. Grief and hope can play tricks on the mind in situations like this. I respect your instincts, Captain, more than you know, but I have to prioritize the lives of the rescuers now. The order stands. Recovery operations. Engine 17, your relief crew is staged. You and your team are officially stood down. Get some rest." It wasn't just an order. It felt like a door slamming shut. Dan looked toward the perimeter, where the makeshift memorial had grown. Flickering candles cast a weak glow on photos taped to the chain-link fence. Smiling faces, lives abruptly interrupted. Family members huddled under umbrellas. Their silent vigil a heartbreaking testament to the hope Dan refused to extinguish. He saw his own crew exchanging glances, torn between loyalty to their captain and the undeniable logic of the chief's command. Thompson met his eyes briefly, a look of shared frustration and helplessness. As Engine 17's relief crew began moving forward, and his own team started the slow process of packing their gear, preparing to leave the scene of defeat. Dan felt a profound sense of isolation. The rain fell harder, cold and indifferent. The weight of the past, the responsibility of the present, and the terrifying possibility of repeating a mistake pressed down on him. He watched the heavy equipment operators doing preliminary checks on their machines, preparing for the grim task of dismantling the tomb at dawn. Recovery. The word tasted like ash. He couldn't leave. Not yet. Not while that faint, remembered rhythm beat a counterpoint to rain in his own chest. He owed them more than this. He owed Jimmy more. The shift change provided the cover he needed. Amidst the organized movement of crews heading out and fresh teams arriving, the transfer of command briefings, and the general lowering of intensity now that the operation mode had changed, Dan Miller simply faded back. He didn't make a defiant speech. He didn't argue further. He just let the flow carry others away while he remained, a shadow detaching itself from the weary exodus. He retrieved only essential gear, his helmet with its powerful light, a sturdy steel pry bar, a compact folding shovel he kept in his personal bag, and his radio turned down low. He caught Thompson's eye as his lieutenant was loading equipment onto the truck. "Cover for me, Tomo," Dan murmured, his voice low and rough. "Just need one last look. Personal sweep. Sector 4. Thompson hesitated, conflict warring on his face. He knew the risks. He knew the orders. But he also knew his captain. He knew the look in Dan's eyes, the unshakable conviction that sometimes bordered on obsession but was almost always right. He saw the ghost of the Franklin warehouse fire reflected there too. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. 15 minutes, Cap. Then I'm calling it in, orders or no orders. It wasn't approval, but it was the space Dan needed. Moving with quiet purpose, a man on a desperate mission, Dan navigated the treacherous landscape of debris, now slick and hazardous from persistent rain. The beam from his helmet cut a sharp cone through the darkness, illuminating twisted rebar like grasping claws, shattered concrete slabs tilted at precarious angles, and the dark voids that seemed to swallow the light. Every step was a calculation of risk. The pile groaned and shifted occasionally, small slides of gravel and brick reminding him of the inherent instability Chief Harris had warned about. His injured knee screamed in protest with every climb, every awkward landing. He pushed the pain down, fueled by adrenaline and that stubborn core conviction. Exhaustion was a physical weight, threatening to drag him under, but the memory of that faint rhythm, that possible sign of life, propelled him forward. He reached the area he'd pinpointed hours earlier, the chaotic heart of Sector 4. The rain seemed heavier here, drumming a relentless tattoo on his helmet, obscuring sounds, amplifying the sense of isolation. Doubt, cold and sharp, pricked at the edges of his certainty. Was Harris right? Was this madness? Was he risking his own life, betraying the trust of his crew, chasing a phantom born of guilt and exhaustion? He started working methodically, scanning the immediate surface, moving smaller, manageable chunks of debris, listening intently between each movement. Only the hiss of the rain and the distant thrum of a generator answered. He forced the doubt back. Focus on the task. Look for anything out of place. His light beam swept across a particularly dense section, a tangle of rebar, broken pipes, and pulverized drywall beneath a massive, tilted concrete beam. And then it caught it. A tiny splash of color, almost completely buried under gray dust and rubble. Turquoise blue, not the drab gray of concrete, the rust of steel, or the faded red of brick. It was the vibrant hue of life. A small scrap of fabric, perhaps from a piece of clothing or a scarf, snagged on a sharp edge of metal. A jolt, potent as electricity, shot through Dan's fatigue. This was it. This was real. Hope, which had flickered dangerously low, roared back to life. He attacked the surrounding debris with renewed urgency, using the pry bar to lever aside heavier chunks, digging furiously with the small shovel. His movements were desperate, but controlled, born of long experience. He knew a careless move could trigger the collapse they all feared. Sweat mingled with the rain on his face, stinging his eyes. His breath came in ragged gasps. "Hello!" he shouted, his voice hoarse, swallowed by the immensity of the wreckage and the muffling rain. "Is anyone there? Can you hear me?" Silence. Just the relentless drumming of the rain. His heart hammered against his ribs. Was he too late? He dug deeper, focusing on the area directly beneath the turquoise fabric, clearing away broken cinder blocks, lengths of conduit, chunks of plasterboard. His light probed the cavity he was slowly exposing, a small, dark opening beneath the crushing weight of the leaning concrete beam. "Hello. If you can hear my voice, make a sound. Tap. Shout. Anything." He stopped digging, held his breath, straining to hear over pounding in his own ears and the rhythm of the rain. So faint. Was it real? Or just a rock settling? There it was again. Weak, muffled, but distinct. Unmistakable. It wasn't settling. It wasn't rain. It was a response. "I hear you." Dan choked out, the words thick with emotion, relief flooding through him with dizzying force. "I hear you. Hang on. Just hang on. I'm coming for you." He worked with the strength of 10 men, adrenaline erasing the pain, the exhaustion, the doubt. He widened the opening, clearing debris frantically but carefully. He angled his helmet light into the void and saw it. Dust-covered fingers, curled slightly, attached to a hand. And beyond the hand, shadowed, partially obscured by fallen debris, a face. Pale, eyes closed, unmoving but seemingly intact, alive. His hand trembled violently as he fumbled for his radio, thumbing the transmit button. "Command! Command! This is Captain Miller. Sector 4. His voice was breathless, cracking, but loud enough to cut through the static. "I have located a survivor. Repeat, I have visual confirmation. Survivor located. Trapped, condition unknown, appears responsive. Requesting immediate USAR deployment. Heavy rescue tools. ALS paramedic team to my location. Sector 4. Now!" The radio silence that followed felt like a physical blow, stretching for an agonizing second. Then the channel erupted. Chief Harris's voice, stripped bare of its earlier weariness, now sharp, urgent, electrified with disbelief and renewed purpose. "Copy that, Captain Miller. All units, hold your positions. Use our team. Rescue 1. Mobilize. Sector 4. Immediate deployment. Paramedics, stage at Sector 4 access. Dan, confirm survivor status and immediate hazards." Dan relayed the information, his eyes locked on the small hand in the darkness. The impossible proof nestled within the tomb everyone else had given up on. He had been right. Against the odds, against the orders, against the crushing weight of despair, someone was alive. Hope hadn't just flickered. It had exploded back into existence because one man refused to let it die. The word "survivor found" ripped through the rain-soaked night like a thunderclap, instantly shattering the somber mood that had settled over the Phoenix Mill site. Radio squawked to life across the zone. Weary heads snapped up. The slow, methodical movements of crews securing the scene halted. A current of disbelief, then surging adrenaline, passed through everyone present. The transition back from recovery to rescue was instantaneous, electric. Floodlights swung around, converging on Sector 4, bathing the treacherous pile where Dan knelt in stark, dramatic light. The heavy equipment, moments from beginning its grim task, remained silent, powerful beasts held at bay by the miracle unfolding. Within minutes, the scene around Dan transformed. The elite urban search and rescue USAR team, specialists trained for exactly this kind of complex technical rescue, descended on Sector 4 with focused intensity. Their movements were a ballet of controlled urgency, laden with specialized gear. Hydraulic rams, air chisels, cutting torches, delicate listening devices far more advanced than the initial ones used, and stacks of wooden cribbing for stabilization. Paramedics, their faces taut with concentration, established an advanced life support station nearby, laying out backboards, oxygen tanks for kits ready for the moment of extraction. Chief Harris arrived, wading through the debris, his eyes finding Dan's. No reprimand for disobeying orders, only a look of profound, almost stunned, relief and deep respect. He gripped Dan's shoulder firmly. "Good work, Captain. Outstanding work. What do we got?" Dan quickly briefed him and a USAR team leader on the situation. A young woman, pinned beneath the massive concrete beam, conscious but weak, location extremely unstable. The rescue operation began immediately, a complex and dangerous dance against time and gravity. The USAR technicians assessed the precarious balance of the debris pile, identifying key stress points, planning each move with meticulous care. They began by shoring up the surrounding area, inserting airbags into crevices, and slowly inflating them to take some pressure off the main beam, inserting hardwood cribbing piece by piece to build stable supports. The whine of hydraulic pumps, the sharp crack of air chisels biting into concrete, the low commands of the rescue leader. "Easy on the ram. Watch that overhang. Cribbing ready," created a tense symphony of effort. Dan refused to leave the immediate vicinity. Though the USAR team had taken tactical control, he remained close to the opening, talking constantly to the trapped woman, Maya. Her voice was thin, strained, but she responded. She was an art student, she told him faintly, working late in her rented studio space when the world collapsed around her. He kept his voice calm, steady, a lifeline of reassurance in the terrifying darkness and noise. "We're right here, Maya. You're doing amazing. That noise is just us making room for you. Almost there. Stay strong." He relayed information back to the paramedics, her level of consciousness, her descriptions of pain or pressure points. He could see the fear etched deep in her dust-caked face whenever his light caught her eyes, but he also saw an incredible spark of fight, a refusal to give in that resonated with his own stubbornness. She told him she could feel pressure on her legs, but didn't think anything was completely crushed. Every piece of information was vital. The process was agonizingly slow. Every millimeter of the beam was lifted, every chunk of concrete removed, risked a catastrophic shift in the tons of rubble balanced precariously above. Hours seemed to melt away under the focused intensity. Dan felt his own body screaming fatigue, the adrenaline beginning to wane, leaving behind a deep, aching weariness. But watching the methodical progress, hearing Maya's faint responses, kept him anchored. Finally, after nearly 2 more grueling hours, the USAR leader gave a signal. "We have sufficient lift and stabilization. Clear path for extraction. Paramedics stand by." With infinite care, the team maneuvered a backboard into the tight space. Gently, supporting her head and spine, they slid Maya onto the board, securing her with straps. Then the slow, painstaking process of maneuvering her out began. As they carefully lifted her free from the debris that had been her prison for over 22 hours, bringing her out into the rain-washed air under the glare of the floodlights, a hush fell over the assembled rescuers. Then a collective exhale, a ripple of raw, unadulterated relief. Some clapped softly, others just watched, tears mixing with the rain on their faces. Maya blinked against the sudden brightness, her eyes searching the figures around her. Her gaze found Dan. Her lips, cracked and pale, moved. No sound came out, but he read the words clearly. "Thank you." A single tear tracked a clean path through the grime on her cheek. It wasn't a tear of pain, but of overwhelming, life-affirming gratitude. As the paramedics quickly assessed her and began wheeling the gurney towards a waiting ambulance, a wave of exhaustion hit Dan so hard his knees nearly gave out. He stumbled back, leaning heavily against a large, stable chunk of concrete, the rough surface cool against his forehead. He watched the flashing red lights of the ambulance pull away, carrying Maya towards safety, towards life. The siren, usually a sound associated with crisis, tonight sounded like a hymn of hope fulfilled. Thompson appeared beside him, clapping a heavy hand on his shoulder. The grip spoke volumes. Pride, relief, awe. Chief Harris approached, his face still holding a measure of disbelief. "Dan," he said, his voice thick with emotion, I owe you an apology, and my deepest respect. You saved her life." Dan just shook his head, too drained for words. He looked back at the dark maw from which Maya had emerged. He thought of Jimmy Rourke, of the weight he'd carried for 15 years. That weight hadn't vanished, but tonight it felt different, balanced. The ghost of the past hadn't dictated failure. It had fueled a fight for a different outcome. He had listened. He had trusted something deeper than protocol. And because of that, Maya was alive. The rain finally began to ease, as if the sky itself was breathing a sigh of relief. The story of Captain Dan Miller's refusal to give up, his unwavering conviction in the face of overwhelming odds, became legend in the city. News outlets dubbed it the miracle at the mill, recounting how one veteran firefighter's gut instinct saved Maya Sharma from certain death after the official search had been called off. From her hospital bed, recovering from severe dehydration, shock, and a fractured tibia, Maya tearfully described hearing Dan's voice as the first glimmer of hope after hours entombed in terrifying darkness and silence. "He didn't give up," she whispered to reporters, her voice still hoarse. "He just kept talking to me. He saved me." Characteristically, Dan shied away from the spotlight. At the PAC ceremony where he received the department's Medal of Valor, he stood awkwardly, his remarks brief and humble. He credited the USAR team, the paramedics, his own crew, Chief Harris, for allowing the rescue proceed. Even the engineers, whose initial caution was understandable. "We work as a team," he insisted. "Anyone on this job would have wanted to do the same. Our fundamental duty is to not leave anyone behind. We just got lucky." But those who had been there, who had witnessed a solitary stand against a tide of official procedure and crushing probability, knew it was more than luck. It was a culmination of a lifetime of experience, the validation of intuition honed by fire and loss, and the sheer, stubborn refusal to surrender hope. It was a quiet power of conviction backed by courage. His action sent ripples through the department, reminding everyone, from the greenest rookie to the most seasoned chief, of the profound impact one individual's commitment could have. His story became a touchstone, an example of leadership, instinct, and the core values they all swore to uphold. For the city, reeling from the tragedy, Dan became a symbol of resilience, a reminder of the quiet, everyday heroes living among them. The first responders, the veterans, the ordinary citizens committed to service and community, embodying the enduring strength of the American spirit. The Phoenix Mill disaster left scars, but the miracle of Maya's rescue offered a powerful counter-narrative of hope and heroism. Dan returned to familiar rhythms of Station 17. The shifts continued. The bells rang. Fires needed fighting. Lives needed saving. He finally fixed the crooked mailbox at home. He walked with Sarah through the fallen leaves at the town park. Life went on. Yet, something fundamental had shifted within him. The shadow of the Franklin warehouse fire remained, a permanent part of his history, but it no longer felt solely like a burden of failure. It felt like a crucible that had forged a resolve needed that rainy night at the mill. Sometimes, glancing at Jimmy Rourke's young, smiling face in the old photograph, Dan felt a sense of peace, a quiet acknowledgement across the years. He hadn't forgotten the cost, but he had honored the promise. Captain Dan Miller, a man defined by duty, resilience, and a quiet courage, had stared into the abyss of loss and refused to blink. He listened to the faintest whisper of life, trusted an instinct born of experience and empathy, and reminded everyone that true heroism often lies not in the absence of fear or doubt, but in the unwavering choice to act despite them. He embodied the timeless American ideal, that even when all seems lost, one person's refusal to give up can illuminate the darkness and bring forth a miracle.